Well, good morning. I'm Larry of Larry's Beans. We're a 100% fair trade organic coffee company. We have a veggie bus. We recycled our building. We collect rainwater off the metal roofs here on the building. Super shiny metal is a great thing for collecting rainwater, and we use it to flush our toilets. We have a penchant to experiment. We like to live outside the box. We do a lot of things that have nothing to do with the core thing of what we do. Sunflowers, composting. What's it have to do with coffee? It doesn't have anything to do with coffee. But I have a penchant to learn. Generally, we believe life should be meaningful. Work life should be meaningful. Work should be meaningful and fun, or both. I also believe life's a journey, personal life and business life. And I'd like to share with you a few stories of this journey I've been on for, 40-something years, but mostly for Larry's Beans. When I was a kid, I had a banana seat bike. When I was a kid, I was really into Batman and Robin and jet engines. Now, my granddad was good at tinkering, and that's my granddad, my Grandpa Larson, in the photo. And he built his own tractor. We seem to have a penchant to just make things happen, build stuff. People all around me build things. My dad was a millwright. My dad had access to parts, lots of parts, all sorts of industrial parts. Remember, I was a kid. I was about 6 or 7 with this story I'm going to tell you. Building things was all around me. So I had a plan. I wanted to get a jet engine on that bike. It would make it easier to get around the place I lived. We lived on a hill, and pedaling up the hill with a one-speed bike was really difficult. And I saw Batman and Robin to know that all I needed was a jet engine, and I could make it work. So my plan was, I didn't tell Dad I was building a jet engine. I told him I was building an engine. I wanted to surprise him with my creativity. So I enlisted Dad to pick up some parts from work. Again, he was a millwright, and he had no problem stealing parts from work. Little pieces of pipe. So I thought if I could screw the pieces of pipe together, and it could make sort of like a frame like this, a goalpost, and then I could bend the corners over, then I'd have the basis for my jet rocket. So it took a while to get Dad to give me all those parts. The first group of parts he brought by was just a bunch of little fittings. I was like, Dad, you're off the team. This is not working. But he brought me bigger parts. I needed some pipes. And he's like, I don't know how you're going to make an engine out of this. He's like, don't worry about it. I got a plan. So I screwed the pipes together in the way I just described a few moments ago. And I fixed it to the bike. Now, I thought it would snap to the frame of the bike a little easier than it actually did. But it didn't. It kind of wobbled around. So I had to get some wire. So a bunch of wire around this piece of metal. And, all right, so I got my jet engine in place. I'm ready to go. What I need is fuel. The fuel side of things, I didn't have that all worked out. I know I couldn't get gasoline out of the shed because Dad would be onto that. He was watching to understand how this is actually going to work. But Dad watched football a lot, so he was in the house a lot watching football. So I had access to the cabinet where he kept his cigarette lighter fluid. And so I thought if I filled the pipe full of lighter fluid and lit it, I would be able to have this jet engine that worked. Well, so I had managed to get the can of lighter fluid out by the bike, and when my sister comes by and asks what I'm doing, she was always a troublemaker. And I share with her, finally, for the first person, I shared how this is going to work. And I think she had more wisdom than I did, and realized that is probably not a good idea. So it was only a few moments later, after I loaded up the pipe with lighter fluid, it wasn't completely full, but it was full enough. The Dad comes out and asks, what am I doing? And it's like, well, I'm so glad you're here. You're about to see the inauguration of my jet bike. And Dad quickly helped me understand we're not going to light the pipe of lighter fluid, and that was a bad idea, and maybe we should go to a different plan. And he managed to change the topic and reprimanded me in some capacity, in a very loving way, as Dad always did. So we didn't light the pipe. And so what later I came to find out, what really I was building was a pipe bomb. So I like to thank Dad for that. So what drives you? What drives me? Imagination doesn't have limits. It's limiting beliefs that can stop you dead in your track. What makes you go on and on and on? Finding your passion can really help you overcome challenges. When I was a kid, again, we lived sort of out in the middle of nowhere, and inventing games was critical. We had a lot of board games growing up, and I don't know where they came from, but they're always there. We could sort of change the rules of the board game, and we'd have a new game. We had endless games. Fascination or fantasy in my head as a kid really got me through and created this little world that I wanted to live in. Kids have this capacity to amuse themselves. Kids rely on their imagination. So imagine where I would be today if I was encouraged to follow one of those little threads growing up. I might be working with penguins in the Antarctic. Anything's possible. But when you're growing up, you learn these limiting beliefs, and so you slow down and you stop looking around. Passion to learn drives me. When I'm interested, I can't stop. If I'm not interested, I can't even start. Follow your passion. It's a critical thing of what's helped me get to where I am. I never intended to roast coffee. I moved to Raleigh in 1991 to go to graduate school. In going to graduate school, I was going after economics. I was working on a graduate degree in economics because economics really drove me. I found it fascinating, and I thought I could help solve the problems of the world if somebody could finally become an economist that made any sense. I thought I could do that. But after a few years, my passion for economics started to wane. It waned because what was going on for me wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Concurrent to that, I was working at a coffee house in Raleigh, in Raleigh's First. And I started getting a real big passion for coffee. As my passion for economics decreased, my passion for coffee increased. And so I decided I needed to really take the plunge and drop out of graduate school. And so I did that, and I started my own coffee company. But when I moved to Raleigh, I had no intention of doing that. It was just following a certain path, following my passion at the time. And though I didn't know it was my passion at the time, I have a much more awareness of that today. I never intended to open Carrie's first coffee house, but I managed to do that, and eventually got rid of it. I never intended to be, it's a lot of work, let me tell you. And I'd like to do it again, actually. It's on my mind again, and I think I'll do it different. But I never intended to be in the fair trade coffee world either. But I had this opportunity to meet with some colleagues of mine who wanted to create this import company. And in this import company, we would buy direct from growers. And buying direct from growers, we specifically wanted to develop relationships with the growers. And in developing those relationships, I got to go on some trips. And my very first trip had a profound experience for me. We went to Chiapas in 2001, Chiapas, Mexico. The Zapatista uprising was 6 years after it first occurred, and there was lots of tension on the ground. And when you go into this zone, and dirt roads and paramilitary every place with machine guns was kind of daunting. Here I'm just this white guy from North America in a relatively safe world of Raleigh and Cary, North Carolina, and now you're in this paramilitary zone with a lot of poor people and a lot of machine guns. You go to a checkpoint and they'd be checking your passport, and it seemed really kind of weird. You're out in the middle of nowhere and you're getting your passport checked. I mean, really, we're not at the airport. So, but the growers, the farmers in this part of the world, were living with all this adversity, and yet eked out their living. And that if we could develop our relationship with them and deepen it, I felt like I could help out their lives some. And I remember seeing these farmers who have very little, and coffee is the only thing they can do to get cash, had so little, and they were so happy. And I contrast that to so many of my American counterparts who had so much and were so unhappy. And seeing that, and these huge families, lots of kids, and they had one another. And it's like they had each other's back to get through life. It's like, we need to do everything at Larry's Beans to only buy our coffee or source it when we can have these fair trade relationships. It was really important to me. I never intended to do that when I went into the coffee business, just like I never intended to be in the coffee business. It's just following these paths. Later, we find ourselves at a point in life where people are coming up to me saying, Larry, since you're doing this fair trade, why don't you do some more recycling? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And during that same time, we had an opportunity to buy our buildings. And when we bought the buildings, we wanted to renovate them. And when we renovated them, we thought, we need to make these buildings less impact on the planet. What if we could design these buildings, or renovate them, in a way we didn't have to use as much electricity or as much natural gas to run the roasters? What if us being in business as a company minimized or reduced how much impact on the planet would otherwise would be? That started driving me. That sort of stuff really made it so I would jump out of bed. And that's kind of where we are today. So what does that have to do with coffee? Renovating buildings and composting worms, or composting with worms. It has nothing to do with coffee. It's following our passions, following my passion, and allowing yourself the journey of which you're on. Also, I like to say, allow yourself the freedom to change your mind. So on this journey, I need a team. We all need a team. We're all on a journey. We all need a team. I just like to acknowledge my team. My team is both real and imaginary. In the imaginary world, well, so before I tell you that, I would say one of the reasons you need a team is there's dark days, there's difficult days, there are new idea days, and there's slog through days. And you need a team to help you get through all that. Your real friends or real people get tired of hearing the same story sometimes, or the same problems you might be sharing. So make-believe often happens, or it helps me overcome. Or if it's not make-believe, it's somebody I actually cannot talk to, but they're real. So I'd like to share with you, I have a category I call adventure and the impossible. My team for adventure and impossible is how do I overcome those moments where it's like, how are you going to get from this side of the globe to that side of the globe? Well, the fantasy of Frederick von Munchausen, the great stories he used to tell apparently in the late 1700s, a movie was modeled after him called Baron von Munchausen, and von Munchausen. And that, the fantasy of his world is fantastic. He could be fighting the Ottoman Empire one moment, and an hour later he could be having tea with the Queen. It's like, that's sort of toss away limitations and getting to wherever you need to be. I have moments when I need that. Maybe it's because I'm working on a new idea. How are we going to get this little widget to work up to this widget? I don't know. But you just free yourself the limitations and you can actually end up finding the solution. So Baron von Munchausen really helps me get through the day sometimes. Compassion. Compassion comes from people like Gandhi. And I think I bring that into the world of fair trade. Gandhi did a lot of things. And I had some experience with somebody in my life who was Gandhi-like. And his name is Bob Lester. Bob Lester I knew as a kid. Bob had a big dump truck. And you imagine being a 5-year-old kid and getting to ride in a dump truck? I mean, it's just fantastic. You're playing with the Tonka toys, and now you're in the dump truck. This big thing just going around. You get to pull the horn. Got to do that a few times with Bob. It's like the fantasy of being in this gigantic truck. We could do anything. We could like roll over those cars. Wouldn't that be fun? We can take dirt and go anywhere we want. I didn't really spend much time with Bob, though. By the time we were 6, we moved away from that neighborhood in Lakewood, Washington, and never saw Bob again. Bob was a very passionate man, though. Being in Bob's company was very calming, always calming. And when I was in my early 20s, I get a phone call from my dad. Dad calls me to tell me Bob's son had a drug problem. And Bob's son was living with Bob. And Bob's son was having a relapse one day. And in that relapse, Bob struggled with his son to not allow the relapse. And a gun came out, and Bob got shot. And Bob was dead. Passionate man, Bob. Bob's my Gandhi. In life, you need people in your camp that are full of tenacity and integrity. And that's my grandparents. It's probably everybody's grandparents. Grandparents have more tenacity and integrity than your parents because their parents are smarter. And you need people that can give you support. Alchemy, I'm going to finish with this. This is my pre-finish, and then it's my finish. To me, alchemy is this. Don't look outside. Stay in touch with your inside. That's where your next step comes from. Find your passion over and over and over. And I'm going to end with this. It's a quote from Gil Bailey. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because we need a lot more people who have come alive. Thank you.